Let's start by introducing Michael Abels from The Acolyte. Tom Wolfe from Paradise. Brandon Roberts from Andor. Ariel Marks, Dying for Sex. Marcelo Zarvos, Good American Family. And Christoph Beck and Michael Paraskevas from Agatha All Along. We did it. And there's waters in case anyone needs waters. Now I have two. We'll throw them around. Excellent. So we're kind of going to go a little one by one with the series for a bit. We have clips. We're planning a Q&A at the end, so if anyone has questions, and certainly for our wonderful mix of folks here, feel free to interject and say all the things you want to say. We are going to start with The Acolyte. Very excited about this. And I'd like to start with the clip that we have. It truly does not get more Star Wars than lightsaber fights.
It really doesn't.
So I think I really want to start kind of at the initial concept of this, really, which is when working on an iconic and beloved world like the Star Wars universe, how do you kind of go about as a composer trying to, one, stay within the sonic universe that pre-exists, while also bringing your own perspective to a new and unique story? Like, how do you thread that needle and find that balance?
Well, that's the exact question. Like, that's where we started, the showrunner and I, and because everybody loves Star Wars in their own way, and there are things about the franchise that define it for each person. You know, a lightsaber battle, for example. But there's a lot of other things, some of which you don't. At least I wasn't consciously aware of until I started to think about it for myself, what they were. And in the case of our show, it's got all original characters. And so that was one thing where it was not, there are ways in which it wasn't your traditional Star Wars, and that was one of the ways. But then it still needs to feel familiar. It needs to feel like that world, because that's why we love it. So so Leslie Headland and I, in our first conversation, was like, how do we separate, how do we identify that this is the brand, and how do we find our own space with it? And so what we decided was that the music, because the characters, some of them were untraditional or they were new characters, that the music was going to be one way in which it felt like the Star Wars world. And so it was, I hope when you heard that clip, you went, it's Star Wars, because that's very much by design. But also, there are new situations and new stories and new types of characters. So the music needed to be able to tell their stories effectively too. So they're in each scene, I would start by saying, how Star Warsy is this, you know, and how is this where we're bringing a different sort of energy, or where we're showing people that it's the world that they know, and kind of every cue has an opinion on that issue. So that's at least how we solved it.
That's wonderful. I think something that really kind of struck me in watching this series, I mean, there was a lot that struck me, but certainly with the nature of the characters, but in particular the setup of the twins and the different kind of dualities that are playing out throughout the series, and as the story is kind of unfolding and interesting twists and turns, right? But what I'd love to kind of get into is really the role of the themes that you're building in here, because I think you're taking a bit of a different approach than maybe the audience is accustomed to in the Star Wars universe, where there's a very clear line between the villains and the good guys. And because of this kind of duality in story that's playing out, the themes themselves may not be tied to an exact character.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's because the way you described it is exactly right. Is that it's not always clear who the good guy is, or our perspective on that, watching their actions, may shift, and that was a way in which this show was not the traditional Star Wars universe. But so the themes to me, a theme is like a literary theme. It's like an idea. It's not a character. And I think I take that approach anyway, simply because, I mean, if I was going to write a theme for myself, it'd be like, well, uh, what if I have different moods, you know? Like it wouldn't be that same. I feel like a hero some days, but I wouldn't honor that theme every day. So anyway, I think of themes as being as representing ideas or feelings, and when a different character has the feeling that this other character was in, I feel like that's the time to play the theme that represents that feeling, not take that person's theme and play it soft or whatever. So, so that was kind of my approach. And I didn't say, okay, this is Soul's theme, and we're going to follow it around. It was like this is that feeling, that aspirational feeling of the Jedi, wanting to do the right thing and believing it's for a good or better cause. And this is the theme of really, this is the theme of revenge. You know, someone really wanting to just wreak havoc. So, and that seemed to work. And it was only kind of, I'm able to talk about this really clearly now, but I kind of had to do that by looking back and seeing how that was working. But in terms of how, that wasn't a plan. It was just looking. It was like, oh yeah, that's why this works here.
Oh, that's interesting. It was more of a kind of subconscious approach.
It I would feel smarter to say that we did that on day, but it's really much more what's working, what's not working. Oh, here's why, and then you think, why is this working? And then that's when you realize that there really was a plan. It just wasn't verbal.
So much of what we do is ultimately rolling with the scenes and
Right?
filling it
It's a
out and
vibe.
using that
Like,
intuition and
what do you
vibing.
say besides
Right.
it's a vibe? And then you have to think of more words to back that up.
So much of what we all do is just vibes. We're rolling with it in the moment. Um, I think one more quick thing I kind of want to get into is, and I'm not as deeply versed in Star Wars. I've seen most of it, but
I've learned that I'm not either.
I mean, it's
I
deep.
thought I
It's
was,
a
and
deep world.
then
It's a deep world. I
yeah.
say only that to protect myself in case that the next thing I say is terribly wrong, and I don't want to get reeked over the internet. But from where I'm kind of coming from, to me, this was one of the first times that I was watching something where the Jedi maybe aren't always the good guys, aren't always right, and
Maybe,
there's a different sense
maybe
of
not.
who they are in this universe. I'd be curious how that plays out musically for you as you approached this.
Well, it's an extension of what I was talking about. Is that the theme for the aspirational side of the Jedi, and you hear that most often with the character Soul because he really seems heroic and like he's really noble. Um, and but when you see them doing things that may not be good, the music is not trying to depict them. That you don't hear the giant, heroic trumpets or anything. You hear the music's much darker, and it just allows you to interpret what's happening and see how you feel about it. Um, and that I did it purely based on the emotions of what the characters were feeling, rather than feeling like I'm now required to make this theme sound bad or something.
Yeah, I think finding those lines is probably going to be a recurring theme as we talk to everyone on through each of these projects. We're going to switch over to Paradise, Mr. Tom Wolfe. Um, and perhaps it's my sense of these things, but pretty quickly in watching the first episode, I got the sense that music was going to be pretty important into how the storyline was going to play out, and perhaps some of that is knowing the first few chords of the Phil Collins classic "Another Day in Paradise" and thinking, oh, I wonder if this show being called Paradise has anything to do with this moment I'm witnessing right now. As the story, you start from one perspective of what you think the story is, that very quickly changes by the end of the first episode. But I'd love to hear what kinds of conversations you were a part of in really creating the sonic landscape for the series to be, because it seemed pretty clear that music is very important overall into the story point and how that's unfolding over the course of the season.
Well, that the song that you reference was tied into the title, and originally was a Guns N' Roses song, which went away for numerous reasons. But trying to think what else. Yeah, Another Day in Paradise, and then we reprise it at the end, which that became a tool that we used frequently. We would introduce a song early in the episode, and then towards the end, reprise it with a very dramatic version of the song, so trailerized versions, which when we originally pitched those, we thought these will never fly. It's too over the top. But they went for it each time.
And is that something then that, I mean, it sounds like perhaps that was something that wasn't from day one, this is exactly the kind of approach we're going to take. It became a bit more natural and organic as part of telling the story.
Yeah, we felt our way in the dark.
See, that's a normal part of the creative
Yeah,
process.
yeah.
You find the right answers as you go.
We also have a showrunner who's very certain of what he likes, and a production team as well. They're not wishy-washy, so if they like something, they like it, and that's what we go with.
Excellent.
Or if they don't like it,
then they'll
it's
tell
just
you.
easier when it's just give me 10 more things or 50 more things. That makes it more difficult.
I know what I don't like, but I don't know what I want.
Exactly.
Right? We've all been there. But I think, I think Another Day in Paradise is a good example. Every Rose Has Its Thorn, and we'll see a clip of this in just a moment. But there were a few others throughout the season. We Built the City in episode 2.
Those were all references to the lead character's palette of what he enjoyed musically and his age as well.
Yeah, it became a part embedded in the story itself. This idea of Cal loved these kind of 80s and 90s rock songs. I think there's reference that his son makes throughout the series that kind of mentions those. So in each of those kind of main instances, there's exactly what you kind of mentioned. This idea of you kind of sometimes really sneaking in the original recording, and then you bring in these covers in kind of emotional ways.
And that wasn't planned until we got into post to reprise a song. We just kind of stumbled onto that.
Excellent. Let's take a look at this clip.
So that song came about for the earlier scene where the president's son performs it at the carnival. So we pitched a bunch of songs for that, and that's how it was reprised here. So it didn't start here, it started earlier.
It also ends with her with a really wonderful line that maybe isn't, for all ages, but it's a wonderful callback to a different scene in that episode. Is this and I guess I'll ask specifically about this one, but also some of these other covers that you're kind of working in there. I mean, they work so cinematically in these moments, and because a lot of these reprises happen as part of a montage, a lot of times kind of closing the episode and wrapping up various story points, but also the twists and turns that are natural as part of the series. Was this something that was pre-existing, or was this something that ultimately needed to be created?
Both. This was created for us by a good friend of ours, Wendy Wang, who's a talented producer, songwriter, and composer. But there were some that existed, and for instance, the Phil Collins cover, that existed. But yeah, this song we created, and it was like 50-50 existing and created.
Excellent. I mean, that shows a certain clarity, I think, of approach on your end, especially once you're like, okay, we know what we want to accomplish. Let's make sure that we're making this fit in the best way possible to tell the story and the emotions we want to take our audience on. Excellent. I think we're going to scoot on over to Mr. Brandon Roberts and talk a little bit about Andor.
You're in a Star Wars sandwich.
Tom is a Star Wars sandwich. That is true. So Brandon, you kind of came into this project in kind of a unique circumstance, I would say, which is that the season 1 composer, Nicholas Bertel, was, my understanding, no longer able to be a part of it. I think there were delays in the process and any of that. So you're kind of stepping in to this role on a pre-existing series with another beloved, iconic world. And I feel like put in this position of, again, needing to try to maintain some musical continuity within the world that exists, while again being your own composer and talented and bringing your own perspective to this evolving storyline. How did you kind of end up needing to approach that? What kind of conversations were you ultimately having with the filmmakers?
Um, yeah, it was unique because I've been in situations where I've been the second guy on something, and normally the marching orders are don't do what the last guy did, don't act like the last guy did, or some version of that. But this was the first case in which Tony Gilroy and everybody said, we love what Nicholas Britell was doing, don't screw it up. So so
No pressure.
no pressure. So but at the same time, the story evolves, and much like probably Michael dealt with too, like the planets, there's new planets, there's new characters, there's et cetera. So all of these things need new thematic material. But I basically inherited a palette, right? I inherited a palette from season 1, and I really try to maintain musical continuity, because years down the road, people will watch this, and I don't want them to feel like there was two different composers. It's that simple.
Yeah, I'm curious how faithful you have to be to that palette that already exists.
Well, I liked the palette. That helped, like, significantly. So like I loved what he did on season 1. So and I stylistically I feel like it's somewhat in my wheelhouse. But then where we went with it was also I felt comfortable with, because really over the course of season 2 we are morphing into Giacchino. We're morphing into Rogue One. It doesn't happen until later, but so my role was this, like you said, try to bring something of yourself, try to put your tiny little stamp on Star Wars and this wonderful story that, like, season 2 was just amazing from a story standpoint, but then also really try to pay homage to what Nick had done, and then try not to screw up going into Giacchino. So I mean, it was and then on top of that, you're trying to also service the needs of season 2 as a standalone. What does each episode need? So it was a bit of sleight of hand. It was a bit of trial and error, but I had a very good support team. I think Tony Gilroy and everyone involved really had my back. So yeah, I felt coddled in a good way. So
Yeah, I was going to mention the Rogue One of it all presents again kind of this unique situation that you aren't just taking a story where in a sound where it left off, but you have to kind of lead it to its own world that people love, with and the sound of Rogue One and is fairly tied to A New Hope and more the Williams world and the Giacchino world. But then simultaneously you have these kind of 3-episode arcs throughout season 2 that also have these jumps in time and evolution of characters along the way. How then all those different variables coming together and the scene you need to play, how does that then work in with the kind of new themes and approach that you need to bring to all of this?
I think in the end, the story is always just going to dictate it. So with the odd exception of how much planets play into Star Wars. Like, I mean, I don't think I really truly realized how many planets have their own vibe, but of course, I mean, obviously. But once you start jumping into them, that dictated a huge amount. And so for each episode arc, I kind of felt like we had a palette cleanser, a musical palette cleanser. So you have new thematic material or a new vibe for each arc. And then in a weird way, the time jump was really nice, because with 12 episodes, I feel like you can feel 12 episodes. Like 9, always like, oh, there's another one, but 12, having this break was nice. But then you also have to keep track of the bigger arc, right, which is the arc of the whole season. Then you have to keep track of the season 1 and 2 arc of the entire show, right? So you're kind of aware of that and how that ties in, and then you're always aware of how it fits in, let's say, in Star Wars timeline in general. So a lot of it was just a balancing act, and then at least in my opinion, I felt like each of the arcs, the 3-episode arcs, were unique enough where they dictated the musical material in a way that was very helpful.
I think you just gave me a perfect segue into your clip, so thank you so much for making
Oh,
me look like I know what I'm doing.
And if you'll look to the monitor, please.
Yes. Yeah, let's show this clip and then we can talk a little bit about it. This episode is an incredibly powerful, moving storyline that also feels particularly pertinent to kind of the larger picture of the world that we're in and the world that we've been in before. You know, this in particular very moving kind of moment as Cyril is kind of coming to a certain realization. Would love to kind of hear a bit more about your approach to this kind of storyline and this cue in this moment.
Yeah. So the episode is, a juggernaut of, directing and writing. So I had to put my big boy pants on. But basically the whole episode is kind of divided into 35 minutes of tension, right? Basically leading to this inevitable massacre. And then that's, that scene's kind of like the first place where the whole thing turns. And you have a moment where the rug's been pulled out from under you, Cyril, and the audience finally gets a chance to take in the horror of all this. But also, to me, what it also means is a loss of innocence for the whole galaxy. And so, fortunately, they got rid of all the sound. So that's like, all composers love that moment. So because up till that point, there's a reason the clip isn't the last 30 minutes, because there's so much other sound going on too. But that was, they basically turned it into a poetic moment, which was great. And it was the whole rest of this episode, the last third, is basically emotional in a loss of innocence sort of way, and the score makes a definite turn there. So it was a lot of heavy lifting with the music, and I don't mean it in a negative way. I mean it. There was a lot going on in this episode, plot-wise, character-wise. It's a huge set piece, so it was required a lot from all departments.
Yeah, it was very very moving. Unfortunately, we have to just keep bouncing around. Next up is Dying for Sex. This is a comedy that is kind of a celebration, ultimately, of life, of death, of human passion and desire. It's very serious. You know what's happening from the jump, from the moment of the premise of the series. You know kind of what you're building into. The thought that I had throughout watching, and the big question I immediately have to ask you, probably not the first one, how do you find that tone? How do you find the right balance of this very serious, traumatic event that we've all experienced in some way while bringing comedy to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was the terrifying task we all had, including the showrunners. And I think, when I was meeting with them, they were still really finding the tone of the show too. And Liz and Kim are amazing comedy writers and also drama, but they really brought their comedy expertise, and of course, like Michelle and Jenny had such an amazing chemistry, and so there was a lot of that baked in already. But it's a show about it's messiness all over the place. It's the awkwardness of sex. It's the messiness of family relationships, of a mother that you're estranged from, but you want to collect ties, tie up loose ends at the end of your life. It's about a best friendship. It's about romance. It's all these things. And ultimately, we just settled on like really leaning into the juxtaposition of that tone. So they're like, and you'll see in the clip, something we found is that anything to do with cancer or trauma, we played very, very lightly, really sparsely, letting the emotion of the acting and the editing lead, and the music actually in a really exciting way got to just do things you wouldn't expect. So a lot of, the show is also about Molly reclaiming her body even while it's dying. And so there's a lot of body-based sound work. There's a lot of really fun effervescent synths. There's more, for their really fun shenanigan relationship. But yeah, I mean, I guess it was really just trial and error. And I have to shout out the music editors. I worked with Zach Millman and Andrew Ransom from JTN because they spent like 3 months in the cutting room before I even touched it, just trying all of these different things. And I had written like 20 different themes for them to start using. And most of them made it in, but it was really, I like don't have an extensive history in comedy, and it was really a lesson for me too of like how important it is, well, obviously timing, but they would end something 2 frames earlier than I had, and it landed perfectly. And anyway, so it was just a masterclass in tone. I think we were all teaching each other through trial and error. And I think they stayed really true to keeping the show honest, and I just followed that lead.
Before we show the clip, there's a moment that happens right before the clip that we see, which you kind of teased a little bit of, but there was something I really wanted to expand on, because what I found in my years of doing this, and I'm sure everyone else has as well, is this sense that sometimes not playing music is the most important musical decision you can make, is allowing a moment to be dry, allowing it to just play out and the actors to be there. And I certainly noticed a bit of that in watching the series, and in particular, the scene before the clip that we're going to watch where Molly is in the tub and kind of coming to a realization about the next step in her life process. And most of that scene was dry, and I kept, as maybe a little bit of the like professional ear chiming in. I'm like, this is where the music starts. No, this is where the music starts. Like expecting a little bit of that cue to work its way in, and it just doesn't and doesn't and doesn't until ultimately it does. But it's a little bit of that unexpected moment that you're talking about. How much of that is a conscious decision that you guys are making to not just be sparse with music, but just to allow it to play?
Yeah, I mean, we had not extensive spotting sessions, but really, really discussions during the spotting sessions. And the sound team was there too. And so that was a real luxury to be able to really talk the collaboration through. And I have to say, like, Liz and Kim had a very, very strong North Star and kind of a gut feeling of when they were feeling manipulated and how not effective that was going to be for this show. So there were definitely moments where we took it out, but it was really just a lesson is how long can we delay something? When do we actually need something? Like fighting against this instinct, like this is where we should have something, or this is where I could put something. And so it was a lot of restraint as a composer too. And in the clip, this is Molly effectively dying. This is 3 generations of women, Molly imagined as a child in bed in fetal position with herself and her mom. It's the healing of those wounds. It's the saying goodbye to your best friend. And like, how do you not overscore that? It was really, really hard.
Let's show the clip. And I think maybe it's because you already mentioned it, so now I'm thinking about it more, but really the role of like breaths in the music are like suddenly apparent to me.
Yeah, very, very much using the body as a tool. And in the more comedic sex scenes earlier in the series, there's a lot of that used in a bit more of a humorous way too. But yeah, it really is like, there's a beautiful sequence too where the hospice nurse is detailing how the body dies and how the body knows how to die, and in kind of a very beautiful way. And so we were that was a big thesis of like, what does it sound like a body fighting itself? What does it sound like simultaneously shutting down due to malignancy of cancer cells, but also being horny and being excited and fighting the cancer medication curbing your libido. What does this sound like in your body? So yes, that was definitely a palette North Star for me.
Very well done. We're going to scoot on over to Good American Family, which is based on true events. It follows a Midwestern couple who adopts a girl with a rare form of dwarfism, and they over time start to feel like she may not be everything that she may be lying about something. Something may be off here. What struck me so much in watching the series, and it's funny, it's a word Ariel just mentioned, is the word manipulation. And not even just from a character perspective, but really from the role of a composer in this moment. What kind of choices did you need to make? What kind of conversations did you need to have with your filmmakers about how to approach a real situation that happened that many people in the audience watching it will have awareness of, or will look up on Wikipedia and start drawing their own conclusions about? How much of that role are you taking on as a composer to be neutral, or to play a little bit of that musical manipulation to skew them in one direction, a perspective or another?
Well, from the very beginning, we knew one of the first things we talked about was there was going to be a shift in perspective halfway through this season. So we knew that was coming, and I had worked with a showrunner on a different show where we had different perspectives, called The Affair, many years ago, where we attempted to do this, but we never quite managed to do it because the music ended up always getting blurred. But in this case, we're always aiming at the 5th episode, which is halfway through the series, where the perspective shifts from the parents to Natalia. And you kind of, all of a sudden, what you think it was, I've seen this horror movie before, that what happens here. And it really is quite different. And it was really, really fun to be thinking about that. We knew we wanted to shift from a more family drama sound, which the earlier episodes have, a more kind of chamber music orchestral sound, to a colder electronic sound, but keeping the theme. And so the thematics remain, but we kept the actors, but we changed the clothing, and that was really fun. And we could kind of make it almost extra sweet and extra scary at first, knowing where we're going to land. And the story is so messy in of itself that nobody really knows, frankly, what really happened other than the people that were a part of it. And that, of course, for composers, much like what Michael was saying before, those shades of gray and the way that truth is never one thing, I feel like that's what music does best. I think music is subjective in its essence, and I think it's wonderful to get to use that muscle in a show.
I think it's a great segue into showing the clip.
Sure.
I mean, it's always a shame when the clip kind of cuts out. I know we're keeping those really tight for the sake of the panel, but what were we just hearing and seeing?
This is when, I don't want to give up too much of the story, but at one point, this child who's 7 years old is declared an adult and dropped in a house by herself. And they say, you're now 22 years old, and you're going to live by yourself. And this is a child that also not only is a 7-year-old child, but that has this rare form of dwarfism, very, very hard to move around, having to just fend for herself. Like literally later in this whole episode is when we finally see who she really is, and she doesn't even know how to open a can of food, or how to wash her hair, or how to even reach for the faucet. So it's quite tragic, really. And this was the episode where we really were able to let it rip. And there's a lot of these long montages of just a child at home figuring it out, and somebody who's already gone through a lot of trauma, coming from the Ukraine and to multiple foster homes and all of that. And but at the same time, there's the innocence of it is a child, and there's sort of like a fairy tale aspect to the whole thing, and again the complexity of how these characters are shown, and ultimately Natalia gets on the other side, and by the time she tells her story, it's kind of too late. They were like, "Well, would you like to go back?" She's like, "Well, I can't. You know, this time has been taken away from me." But it was, you know, the music became a lot more electronic, a lot more guitars, a lot more synths, percussion, but always keeping this one. I mean, the same theme that is there is the main title, and it's the same sequence. It's the same melody that we really stuck with from the very beginning, and that was another thing that I found in the past difficult to do in shows that I work with, because the music ends up going wherever it's going to go. And in this case, we're able to always keep coming back to it, which was very, very satisfying.
And does that theme evolve when it's more from Christine's perspective, and then you kind of make a twist of it
Yes.
for Natalia's?
Yes, and even the main titles themselves, we actually changed. We had one main title sequence for the first 3 episodes, and then we used that theme, but in a very different dressing for a couple of episodes. And then the final 2 episodes is sort of a collective perspective, and it's sort of a mishmash of both things. And all of this was by design, and were things that I was very skeptical at first, but we ultimately were able to pull it off, and it was very satisfying.
Well, it works really well. It works very well.
Thank you very much.
Well done.
Yeah.
Next up is our duo from Agatha All Along. Well, we got some fans in the house. So Agatha All Along is an extension of WandaVision, which is an extension of various other entities in the larger Marvel Cinematic Universe. How much, when you're approaching a series like this, are you leaning on some of these pre-existing themes and story points? Or how much are you able to kind of step in and create it on your own? I think in particular with WandaVision, where there's a clear line there that's connecting these two together.
I think working in an extended cinematic universe like the Marvel Universe is so much fun. I've worked on a number of movies and TV shows, and I know I speak for Michael too. We've worked together on a number of them. We look for any opportunity to establish thematic continuity, not only within a series, but across series and across films. I know not only the kind of crazy, nerdy fans love hearing it like as Easter eggs, but also I really think there's a subconscious effect where if you watch these movies and these TV shows throughout the cinematic universe, you can draw these subconscious connections between different series, something you might have seen a year ago. And I think that gives a certain kind of resonance that I think is really special and really fun to play with.
And I think another thing that was interesting with Agatha was, you know, as we're talking about Star Wars, how there's a certain sound that you associate with that. With Agatha, we were actually kind of going the opposite direction and trying to really differentiate from the rest of the Marvel sounds in the sort of traditional comic book superhero palette. And so, you know, we're taking these themes and using themes from other shows and developing themes from WandaVision. But then now we're sort of putting in this new context for Agatha and, you know, getting rid of French horns and trumpets and these timbres and colors that you normally associate with these heroes, because I think we have, you know, these very different characters, and trying to play more subtext and examine sort of like the darker side of these women, and found that, you know, messing with the orchestra and that sort of those expectations really opened up a lot of doors for us.
Yeah, I was a little skeptical at first. Michael came to me with this idea, Chris, trombones only. Okay, let's try it.
I was going to say the Acolyte would never.
Oh my God, no.
I mean, I feel like the world of the kind of witchy world of Agatha All Along, you know, gets so much depth from the Coven itself, from all these new characters that are introduced, and inevitably, as you kind of teed up, all the different with these new characters, all the different themes that are now associated with them. So you're going on this journey to completely different worlds from episode to episode with these new characters, with some existing themes still kind of around, going through different periods and different locations. How then do you approach these kind of themes and motifs to make sure that it all kind of connects? And perhaps maybe the clarity there is with Patty Lupone, which I know is going to be in the clip that we see. But in that episode in particular, now I'm going on a tangent, but it loops back, I promise. In that episode, episode 7, which Patty Lupone, there's so many little pieces that start to be connected in that episode and in a couple sequences in particular that were sprinkled throughout the series up to that moment. And so maybe that's a better example for you to discuss kind of the different little themes and how those all kind of come together.
Yeah, and I think, like, as Chris was saying, you know, really set a foundation of a strong theme associated with each of these characters. It's, you know, you have your avocado toast, and you can dress it up in so many ways, and have all different spices, different seasonings, and I think that, but you still have that foundation, and you know, as we're leaning into these different genres, we can really like go all in with, you know, these psychedelic guitars, you know, harkening back to the 60s. We have this true detective, true crime sort of pastiche. We're doing these like darker synths. But I think the character themes are still there. We still have Agatha has a strong theme, Rio has a strong theme, Billy, and that serves as our anchor and lets us, you know, dress it up however we want. But it's, you know, that's at the heart of it, like that sort of carries the journey for them.
It's helpful with a show with this expansive a story and this many characters too, to like literally have like a Bible of themes. We just like write all of them and you can have them to refer to, so that you can keep track of all the different spices to put on your avocado toast.
Sounds like everyone here keeps a really tight spreadsheet. That's what it sounds like to me. Let's show the clip. I'm just going to give you a simple, tell us about it.
Patty Lupone.
Patty Lupone, Patty
Thank you.
Lupone, Patty Lupone.
I think especially this episode is really special. As you said, she, you know, carries this story and this particular episode, and it really unlocks so much of our understanding of the show and so much of our understanding of literally the identity of several characters. And you know, that's the very beginning, and it just sort of kickstarts this huge, you know, sort of journey back through the different episodes as we're recontextualizing everything. And I think there's also we're setting up this sort of idea of fate, of time, that the characters are, you know, have throughout these different episodes and these different trials that they've encountered, that, you know, they're coming up against that and sort of this sense of destiny. And then, spoiler alert, like the end of this episode ends with that exact same shot, exact same melody on the cellos, but then recontextualized, you know, to fit, you know, what has transpires throughout that show.
And a scene like that opening shot, it's so cinematic, it's so beautiful, it's so poetic. And to echo what Brandon said about the scene that we showed of his too, also with no dialogue, so it's just like got so much room for the music to do the storytelling there. And when there's that much space, the music gets to be more restrained. It doesn't have to fight as hard to be heard, and then you can get into the subtleties and the nuances, and those are just opportunities that we relish.
I'm going to ask a question of the group because you guys gave me a perfect segue to a question I was kind of hoping to ask. But again, you guys are really doing the hard work for me, so thank you. Which is really one of, you know, as you're working on these projects, there's always like a little something that you sneak in somewhere that maybe is a direct callback, maybe it's a direct reference or Easter egg that you're actively thinking about, obviously, but something that maybe the audience hasn't caught, that whether it's intentional or not, that subconscious thing, that whether you're doing it for yourself or you're doing it for the greater storyline and kind of tying something. I'd love to know if any of you have any of those throughout these projects that you worked on, a little special Easter egg or a special little influence or maybe an instrument you always wanted to use and you couldn't, and you snuck it in this time around? Wow. Wow. I thought that might be a better question than it turned out to be.
We set you up really well.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, well, at least y'all brought up the Easter egg, so you got to give us your favorite Easter egg from the season.
I mean, there's definitely a lot of Easter eggs in there. I would say a personal one for me actually is I grew up playing clarinet and love bass clarinet, even though I don't really know how to play like the actual bass clarinet. But for this show, you know, we're really trying to get a lot of really interesting sounds and sort of instruments played wrong and sort of weird textures and weird noises, and that's really serves as the foundation of the music. So I just had a lot of fun doing that. You know, spending a day just, you know, pressing buttons and blowing and making weird noises, and even got my girlfriend to do it as well and hit it in a couple spots to see if she could find it. And she did not. I had to show her. It was too Easter egged, but
So I'm sure the fans have have identified any Easter egg that's. So you said one they have. So
I mean, hopefully one they
well,
haven't, or just one of your favorites.
one thing that's an Easter egg to me is that there's an adorable small furry character named Basil, and Basil has a theme, and it's used in the show, but there wasn't room to put the whole theme. So on the soundtrack, I did Basil's complete theme in my world of what the scene that Basil ought to have had, where it's all about Basil. So if you are a soundtrack album fan, Basil's theme is on there.
Next year on Disney Plus, Basil.
Exactly. It was Basil all along.
It was Basil. Well played. Marcelo, do you have one?
First, there was a thing that was actually, unfortunately, our music supervisor is not here, but we had the song Shiloh that came in early in the series, and there was a couple different iterations of it. And the end of the entire show is a very long version of Shiloh, where I was able to kind of merge my score with the song, and we had this amazing Wise Blood came to sing it, and it was kind of a wrapping up of the whole thing. And sort of unconsciously, this is a song that was very meaningful to me outside of the show, and the lyrics are so poignant to what her experience is, Natalia's experience. So I feel like that there were a lot of little bits of Shiloh, not in a way that's going to get me to copyright infringement, I hope, but
Of course not.
more
You would
in a
never.
philosophical, spiritual way, where this amazing song and the words, sometimes the words of a song can inspire a lot in your mind as a composer, even if you're not quoting the actual melody. And so there's some Shiloh throughout, yes.
Excellent. Well, before I was going to ask another question, but I feel like that one didn't go over well for me. So we're going to let the audience ask some questions. I don't know if there's microphones, how that works. Oh, no. Okay, I saw this hand go up right away, so you get to go first. I think speak loudly.
A lot of composers have been saying that the days of scoring directly to picture are becoming kind of behind us. What's your guys' thoughts on that? Can you write more music that's not to picture and it's adapted to the screen? Or is there still a lot of stuff that's written directly to picture? I don't know who you're talking to, but I have not heard that at all.
Yeah, agreed.
Is that really a thing? Yeah, okay. Well, the art is, at least the way I learned it and the way I would imagine, and maybe it's a generational thing, I don't know, but is to write to picture. And scoring not to picture, there's still someone who has to practice that art of matching music to picture and helping tell the story. So I think whether it's done by two people or one person, we're still talking about the same art form, which is musical storytelling with a moving picture. Yeah.
I'll jump in. I actually think that there's something to be said. The way I see it in film music, there's two separate elements. I think there's the composition of music, which is music is what we all do. We create melodies, chords, and all of that. And there's how that works to picture and the music editing of it all, which as composers, we kind of do both. But I have come to really admire in other people's works, and sometimes looking back at movies that I love from the past, that where there's can be a non-self-conscious relationship between image and almost like the way the needle drops will happen, and they clearly were not written to picture. And they can create something very special. And I've been humbled many times in my life when a director, an editor, will get a piece of mine. I mean, I work a lot with Barry Levinson, and he would always use my music where I didn't write it to. And at first I was like a little offended, but then eventually I saw it through the eyes of a filmmaker what that can be. And that's not contradicting. I agree that the art ultimately is what is on the screen, but there is something about that marriage of one work of art with another in time that, and to be very blunt, sometimes you call the I Ching method of film scoring, where something goes and something happens that is truly magical. And as much as I would like to say that it's all about writing frame by frame, I do think that there's a lot of happy accidents that can be incredibly powerful too. So.
Yeah, I would agree, especially with something as tonally ambiguous as what we were working on. Most of the work was done before it was cut, actually. And the editors had this library of music to work from. And then obviously I would go back in and do a final pass. But it's really, to me, a beautiful collaboration when the editor and the showrunner can choose a piece of music, to your point, that you would never put somewhere as a composer, but their collaborative eye has a really different point of view, and that's what it's all about, right? So it's, and I also find that I'm bolder and more creative when I'm just creating an initial draft of something versus putting it to picture. And then obviously I adapt it, and some things don't work, and it's just a part of the process. But I think there's something to be said to definitely doing work beforehand, and also it eliminates the need for a lot of temp, which then it's part of the DNA of the cut already, which I find super valuable, especially in selling something as kind of crazy as what we did.
Everybody's got an answer on this one.
I love it.
Yeah, no, it depends on the tone of the project you're working on. Like Acolyte, all to scoring to picture 100%. But I've had the same experience with Jordan Peele as Marcelo has. Jordan is the script, wrote the script. So if he likes the music, I sometimes don't even tell him what music I think the scene is for, because if the music's working, he'll know where it goes. And he'll always choose a scene that I didn't think of, and it's great because it helps me get to know how he's thinking about the story. And so, and it's very much like what Ariel said, where if you write music beforehand, then that music can become part of the editing DNA. And that's a beautiful thing in a type of project where it's a series and it's ongoing and you want that DNA threaded in from the beginning. So there's being able to approach it from every perspective, is super helpful for a composer.
Great panel. Are there any musical cues, inspiration, or Easter eggs you could talk to us about for certain characters? Say, is Billy's power-up scene at the finale? Is there any Wanda and Max musical cue, or an Andor, the Andor or Vix have any musical cues of any other characters from Rogue One or other Star Wars characters?
Yeah, I'd say for Billy, he's, spoiler alert, the son of Wanda, the Scarlet Witch, and we're careful because his identity isn't revealed till like halfway through the season, but needing a theme for him that could represent that. And so we had sort of started out his theme with a similar phrasing, and this sort of builds on the same sort of 3-note structure as Wanda's theme, and sort of tease at it. And then I think what's so cool about Agatha and a lot of shows like that where you can go back and watch it again with a new context, and so there's kind of built that into the fabric.
And there are a couple of spots where we actually quoted themes from WandaVision. There's a love theme that comes in, mostly when there are there were a couple scenes in the show that really refer back to events in WandaVision.
And regarding Bix and Cassian, we had what almost is like a Bix's decision theme, if that makes sense. So it rears its head in 207 during the Force Healer sequence. And then without giving literally everything away, it rears its head obviously later on. And so that thematic material was not so much about their relationship, but about maybe her decision. But it definitely makes a reprisal.
Hi, everyone. So I was wondering, just in your careers as working composers, what you feel was the project that was your big break, and sort of how you adapted to that project, or adapted your workflow, sort of rose to the occasion, and how that project helped to sort of lead to more opportunities in your careers.
I'll go. For me, it was a smallish drama from a long time ago called "The Door on the Floor," and I had never really worked on an orchestral score. I was doing a lot of indie movies in New York and small little things, and I had the chance to do this film that was very transformational. It started a whole relationship with the studio, and I can trace everything I've done from this one project. It was not particularly successful, but it was stamped a lot and wound up in commercials and all sorts of things. And so for me, I met my agent through it and all sorts of wonderful things. Yeah.
I think there's two parts to that, actually, where you have your professional career, like the actual work, and then you have, so that might be project based, but then you have your relationship part of it, and the career always seems to need both. So some of the biggest growing moments are things you learn from either colleagues or people you work for higher up in the food chain. And so I would say, like, I've been fortunate to work with Marco Beltrami. So a lot of my growth came from seeing how he treats people, how he writes, all of those various things. So I don't know if it's so much like one project as much as it's, that dyad of like your actual work and then your relationships, and that branches off into everybody, including directors and agents and the people that used to get you coffee who are now your boss. So so you're warned, forewarned.
I spent a lot of time in the indie world before TV, and I just had a really amazing experience of the indie sensibilities that I did on a film called Shiva Baby were then called for in TV series that I never thought I never thought I'd have the chance to be as experimental as I was in that. And so I think making sure that I just feel very passionately about putting out exactly what you want to do in the world, and it'll get in the right hands. But yeah, to starting, saying yes to those early projects and being as bold and honest to your own voice as possible kind of only leads to more gigs that allow you to do that.
For me personally, I mean, the first job I ever did that people actually heard of was Buffy the Vampire Slayer, way back when. And then I could trace, if I want to be a little bit reductive, I could trace my career to like pre-Frozen and post-Frozen. Frozen was a pretty big deal, and it really shifted some things in my career. And with regards to your question, like, how do you prepare for it? I think I would say fortunate to have a very organic, kind of linear progression in my career, where it feels like every job I did prepared me for the next and the next and the next. And it feels very organic. It's not, when those two projects came along, I felt like they came along just as I was ready for them, and I didn't really have to think too hard or panic about, what I was going to do or how I was going to work on it, or workflow or process or anything like that.
I think for me, speaking of relationships and Brandon and Marco, a similar relationship with me and Chris, and really thankful for his mentorship. And opening up a lot of doors, and letting me. I think Ant-Man 2, where you finally trusted me to write on big orchestra and really get to really go out there and be expressive, and just really thankful for that opportunity, and seeing Chris's expertise and his process and getting really close view of that. I think is having any sort of mentorship or relationship like that is just invaluable. So thank you.
Thanks, Michael.
I'm sorry to say I got the signal that I have to wrap. But this has been really wonderful speaking with you all and learning a bit more, in detail about your tremendous work on these projects. Please, everyone, watch these things if you haven't already, and if you're TV Academy voters, you know what to do. Thank you all so much. We have to head out over that way.